What's going on, boxing fans? It's Julian Williams with the distance. I did say earlier that I wasn't. I think I said earlier that I wasn't going to post any more videos for the time being for a while, so possibly like this weekend. But I thought that the Pacquiao Mayweather situation was very unavoidable. So anyway, I'm just going to give my thoughts on this situation here. The Manny Pacquiao Floyd Mayweather situation. The whole debacle and stuff. It's very awkward because a lot of boxing fans were very excited about 4 or 5 weeks ago when they both decided to come to terms with the contract, when they said they both agreed to terms and stuff. And then about around Christmas week of Christmas, we kind of we heard about the testing, the Olympic style testing and stuff like that. I did read a comment like a second ago before I posted this video from one of my subscribers, and he said that this is a robbery to the boxing fans. And in a way, I kind of feel that way, that it is a robbery to the boxing fans, because now in a way we're watching fights that we don't want to see. Honestly, I think that in a way it was a bit jinxed. When I say it's a bit jinxed about these fights, I'm saying this because that these fights are jinxed because all of us were expecting Mayweather versus Pacquiao on March the 13th, rather than Pacquiao Foreman or possibly Mayweather Malignaggi. We weren't expecting we weren't expecting these fights to happen. We were expecting Mayweather versus Pacquiao. That's what the boxing fans wanted. So in a way, a lot of boxing fans are gonna feel cheated about this fight, because this matchup brought a lot of intrigue. It brought a lot of the boxing fans together and against each other. Especially this debate between who's better, Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather Jr. This actually brings a lot of boxing fans against each other in it. And as an overall boxing fan, I kind of just stand in the middle. I like Pacquiao and I like Mayweather. I don't post many videos on Pacquiao and Mayweather, but I'm not a biased channel at all. Don't have a problem with biased channels or anything. That's just not me. I like to look at things from both sides. And I've noticed when I first got into boxing sites, boxing websites, I remember the number one man was Bernard Hopkins. Number one pound for pound, I believe, was Bernard Hopkins. And this is after the De La Hoya fight. This is after the De La Hoya fight, and I believe that the number one pound for pound was Bernard Hopkins, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was Floyd Mayweather Jr. And he had an impressive victory against Arturo Gatti. And I remember that same year, I believe it was the same year, Manny Pacquiao lost to Morales. But I noticed on a lot of boxing boards, some boxing websites I would go to, there was a lot of tension between the fans of certain fighters. Like there was a lot of Hopkins fans and there was Jones fans, and kind of before that, it was Hopkins fans against Jones fans. And this is back when I first started to use the internet quite often to look at boxing news and stuff. And I remember, I think and there's a video on YouTube when they talked about, I think it was not Mayweather but Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins talking all kinds of smack to each other, and they just went back and forth. And I just remember my early days getting on the internet and looking up boxing. It was always Jones and Hopkins fans. And then around 2005, it was like Mayweather fans, and then I noticed there was Pacquiao fans as well. And then it wasn't until like maybe last year until I started to kind of see the divide between Mayweather and Pacquiao fans. That there was just a big divide or a big tension between Mayweather fans and Pacquiao fans. There's a lot of emotions involved, and with this fight happening, this fight was definitely going to bring the fans coming together head to head. You know, a lot of people, in this fight, you have to. This is one of those fights where you just have to choose sides. You have to choose which side to. If you're breaking down this fight, you have to choose a side. Mayweather or Pacquiao, just like any fight. So I'll admit when I first got into boxing, when I first started to get onto the websites, when I first started to look around like on ESB, I was a big Mayweather fan. I was a huge Mayweather fan, and to this day I am a Mayweather fan. And then Manny Pacquiao, I'll admit I didn't like Manny Pacquiao at first because I was so mad about how he beat when he beat Marco Antonio Barrera. And Barrera was one of my favorite fighters. One of the fighters I used to watch. As a kid, I was actually I was actually a big fan of the trilogy with Morales. I was a big fan of that fight. Very action packed, and that's kind of back when I was a bit of a casual fan before I was a hardcore fan. It's a fight that I just watched, and I watched that fight, and I grew to like Marco Antonio Barrera, and Pacquiao, beat him. So, it was kind of like I didn't. Sometimes when you're young, you kind of like with me and Roy Jones, you kind of just become emotionally attached to a fighter. And that's kind of how it was. That's how it was when I was younger. But as I grew older, Pacquiao grew on me, and he became one of my favorite fighters as well. So I kind of stand in between, because since Mayweather since he became champion in like '98, I was watching Mayweather. Pacquiao watched. I think I first watched him in the Barrera fight. It was the first time I saw Pacquiao. I heard his name a few times, but the first time I saw him was against Barrera. But I noticed that since last year, maybe before that, when I first got into ESB, there's just a lot of Mayweather versus Pacquiao, all over, the site, and before Kelly Pavlik lost, it was Pavlik Calzaghe, stuff like that, and I think that with this, a lot of people say this will settle the thing once and for all between Mayweather fans and Pacquiao fans, kind of settle the debate, the argument, and stuff like that. But sometimes I kind of question it. Will it separate the? Will it stop the kind of the tension or anything? I always wonder about that. Will it settle the tension or not? That's one of those situations where it's like let the best man win and stuff like that. But this fight does leave us in a very awkward situation because we're having to watch fights that we don't want to see. We want to see Mayweather versus Pacquiao because this matchup is very historic. There's a story to this matchup. As far as the background of the matchup goes, because you have Mayweather fans and Pacquiao fans. And to me, Manny Pacquiao is a cultural icon for the Philippines, and Floyd Mayweather is pretty much an icon as well. He's I think in years we're gonna see Mayweather as an icon, and that's pretty much depending on this one fight here. I think that this fight, definitely represents the the kind of the little comic book tale of antagonist versus protagonist. The villain versus the hero. So this is a good fight. This fight has to be made. Too much money involved, too much emotion involved, just too much involved for it to not happen. But we'll see. Hopefully sometime by the end of the year we will see this fight. But like I said in another video, you never say never in the sport of boxing. I'm just gonna pray that this fight happens sometime this year. But anyway, thanks for watching. That was The Distance. Peace.